The first session is on MOD in transit, the opening session, integrating microtransit and public transit best practices and future plans. And the session will be moderated by Scott, who is President and CEO at SFB Consulting. I'm not going to go ahead and read Scott's biography. I'm going to hand over the controls to Scott. But I must say that I met Scott in person this year for the first time at our conference on mobility as a service, and I had a lot to learn from him. So really looking forward to Scott moderating this session. Over to you, Scott.
Great. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Scott Belcher, and welcome to the Mobility on Demand in the United States Conference. Our opening session is integrating public transit into public transit best practices and future plans. So just a couple of housekeeping things from my end. For those of you who don't know me, I ran ITS America for 7 years, ran the Telecommunications Industry Association for a number of years, and now I work with progressive transit organizations and progressive technology companies to bring technology, new technology into the market and try to disrupt our current system. I want to thank the sponsors. Having worked on a number of these conferences over the last many years, we can't do it without you. And so I hope everybody gets a chance to connect with the sponsors. They've not only put their personal time in, but also financial resources. So thank you. So we have an amazing panel this morning that I'm really excited about, largely because we have two really interesting transit organizations and then one of the transit technology leaders. We have John Andoh, from the administrator and general manager of County of Hawai'i Mass Transit Agency. Inez Evans, the president and CEO of IndyGo, and her colleague, Erin Vogel, who's the COO of IndyGo. So both of those are transit agencies. And then Audrey, Denis, the strategy manager for Cubic Transportation Systems. And I know that many of you have worked with Cubic over the years or will at some point. So this is pretty straightforward panel. As you heard before, each speaker will do a brief presentation. I'm going to ask you each to kind of introduce yourself and what you're why you're engaged in this, and then do your presentation. We're going to hold questions till the end. So if you want to put your questions, so keep questions at the side, and also if you want to put them in the chat box, that's great. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible, and I will try to do my best to try to keep it interesting and engaging. And so I'm hoping that the speakers will be able to communicate and argue amongst ourselves, which will make it even more interesting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John, who's going to do the first presentation, and let him take it from there. And John, I'll give you a heads up in the chat box when your time is up. So, or when we're getting towards the end of the time. So John, over to you.
Aloha and good morning. I will upload my presentation here. All right, my name is John Andoh, and I'm the Mass Transit Administrator and General Manager for the County of Hawai'i Mass Transit Agency. Today, we're going to talk about how we are rediscovering the importance of transportation and mobility on an island, and how we're integrating various modes of public transportation into our microtransit service that will be starting later on this fiscal year. To give you a perspective on what we have going on in Hawaii County, that's also known as the Big Island in the state of Hawaii. We adopted a transit and multimodal transportation master plan in August of 2018 that is undergoing an update as we speak. And the overall goal is to link public transit to multimodal transportation opportunities, rebuild a transit system that's been suffering for many years, ensure that it's financially sustainable, promote economic development, expand our routes and services, restore our ridership that has dropped significantly over the past decade, and implement various new modes of transportation opportunities, bike sharing, microtransit, transportation network company partnerships, and specialized demand responsive services. This gives you a perspective of our new brand and how every service that we operate will be themed around this brand and will have a Hawaiian name associated with the service that we are providing. Our new transit network started on September 5th of 2021 based on the master plan recommendations. As part of that phase one, we launched a revised network of 24 routes throughout the Helion network. 13 of those run on Sundays and holidays. We added later evening service. We created interim hubs as we transitioned more to a hub and spoke system. That's in Kailua Kona, in Waimea, in Hilo, in Pahoa, and in Keau. We implemented a network of circulators in our densely populated areas of the island. We increased our services to the airports on our island. We have 3, Hilo, Kailua Kona, and Waimea. Created 3 express routes that are designated by color. We expanded our paratransit services in the Pahoa area of our island, or the Puna district of our island, which includes Pahoa. We launched flex route services. And then we also implemented a trolley service that's geared more to visitors in Kailua Kona along Ali'i Drive. This map shows you a perspective of our island for 4,200 square miles where we provide services. We also implemented a new paratransit network. That paratransit network utilizes a network of subcontractors and minivans to help deliver our service. And from a technology perspective, we have EcoLane that allows for planning and scheduling trips. And then as part of that, where we have the frequent circulator service in our densely populated areas, we have a paratransit service that actually operates a 1-mile radius surrounding those routes. And then in addition, as I mentioned, we have the flex routes that provide general public service that go off route for a mile in various areas of our island. So our flex route service, the first time the agency has launched these type of services, they're open to the general public. Anyone can request a route deviation up to 1 mile off the route, and the routes are appropriately scheduled to allow for that. They're free to everybody. We operate a zero fare transit system, and we'll be doing that for the next 5 years. We have this running on 5 routes where it just doesn't make sense to provide traditional fixed routes and buses going into the hills or in dense or in rural areas of our island. And we use small cutaway vehicles to provide that flexibility. This gives you a perspective of some of the flex routes that we have. 301 in the Waimea area, 403 in Fern Acres, Eden Rock, and Fern Forest. Each of these flex routes connects at a hub where they can transfer to microtransit services that are being launched later on this year, or fixed route transit. We have the Route 60 that goes along the Hamakua coast between Hilo and Waimea, the Route 12 between Volcano, the National Park, and Ocean View. And Ocean View has the largest subdivision in America. And then Route 75, which is along the western portion of our island between Hawaii and Kawai'i. This is an exciting feature that we're getting ready to launch later on this year. We are working on the program now. It is going to be a service that will integrate with our fixed route system. It'll be available in 3 zones. In the Kau and Puna districts, we have massive subdivisions, as I'll show you on the next slide, where even though we have traditional transit going through those subdivisions, the traditional transit really connects people from the subdivisions to mainline transit to get to other areas of the island. Whereas the goal of the microtransit program is to provide door-to-door service within the subdivisions and also connect people to local shopping, recreation, and they wanted to visit other residents utilizing minivans within those subdivisions. Connections to traditional Helion service would be available in Pahoa, Ocean View, Volcano, and Ke'au. And we're working on procuring an app that will allow people to schedule their rides, cancel their rides, and the app will function similar to like Uber and Lyft, so that the dispatchers don't necessarily need to be involved in the dispatch of these minivans. So these are our microtransit zones that we'll be offering. It's a total of 3 zones. Zone 1 will feature the subdivision of Hawaiian Paradise Park with connections to the hub in Pahoa where you see the T. I'd also serve another subdivision called Orchid Land. Zone 2 would be particularly in the Orchid Land area, Mountain View, Volcano, Volcano Village, Fern Acres, Fern Forest, Eden Rock, and it will connect to routes in Ke'au at that hub. And then lastly, Zone 3, which is down in the southernmost portion of our island, also the southernmost point in the United States. And it will connect people in Pahala, Punaluu, Nalilu, and then Ocean View, where I mentioned as the largest subdivision in America. And you can kind of see on the map down below how big that subdivision is. And it's fairly massive to get across one end of Ocean View to the other end of Ocean View. And those folks can also make connections to traditional Helion service at the Ocean View park and ride lot down there. Initially, as we launch this microtransit program, it will operate utilizing basically one or two vehicles, and the zones are going to be based on days of week. So zone 1 will be Fridays, zone 2 will be Tuesdays and Thursdays, and zone 3 will be Mondays and Wednesdays. Our goal for the 1-year pilot is to evaluate demand to see how successful it is. And as we see demand grow, we'll consider adding additional days to each of those zones to meet that appropriate demand. You'll also notice that we also have traditional fixed route going through some of these zonal areas. We'll also be monitoring how those traditional fixed routes work in conjunction with the microtransit service, and then be making adjustments to the fixed route transit as necessary. In addition to the microtransit services that we'll be offering, we have a door-to-door service that operates island-wide. We partner with a local nonprofit organization that helps us in the delivery of these services. It operates by district, and we have 9 districts on the island. And this service basically is available to anybody as long as they can't get to a traditional Helion fixed route bus that we have crisscrossing our islands. And this gives you a perspective of the districts that we have our door-to-door service operating from by our partner, Hawaii County Economic Opportunities Council. Generally, the buses stay within the district, and they would connect and drop people off at a local Helion route if they want to get between districts. And in some cases, we would authorize trips to go between like one district to another, just as long as that vehicle can return back to the other district to continue to provide rides. We have a shared ride taxi program that has been operating since the 1990s, and presently it operates in the Hilo area. We subsidize trips at $6 a ride, and we also have coupon books where people can buy 30 rides for $15. It basically is another supplemental service to the Helion system, and it's another way to connect people to destinations that traditional Helion bus cannot serve, since many of our routes stay on highways or major roadways. We have 3 taxi cab providers that participate in this shared ride program, and they also provide ADA accessible vehicles so that everyone has access to the program. Starting later on this fall, we'll be expanding the shared ride program with Uber, and we'll be subsidizing Uber trips at $12 per ride, utilizing the UberX shared platform so we can encourage shared trips. They will be also referring those that have mobility devices to our taxi cab companies, which will be noted on the Uber app. And similar to with the shared ride taxi program, this would allow for our shared ride program to be island-wide for the first time. And basically the service will be available where there's limited heli-on service. It will also be accessible to those that are unbanked through the use of Visa, MasterCard, American Express gift cards, or Uber gift cards that will be promoting to our community on where they can buy those gift cards. We just started a van pool program called Heli-on Hoa Holo. And this van pool program is another way on how we connect people to jobs. We've budgeted 30 vans at $500 per month per van. We have 17 vans on the road as of August of 2022, and we just started this program in May of 2022, so it's been a hit. And the goal is to create additional passenger miles and revenue miles for our transit agency, and to help connect people to jobs when it's difficult or doesn't make sense for a traditional heli-on bus service to do that. It is the first public-private van pool partnership in the state of Hawaii, and Commute with Enterprise is our contractor in the delivery of this service. We ensure that we have ADA accessible van pools. We have emergency ride home program, ride matching, we're marketing the program, and then Enterprise also provides the vans to our van pool groups. We also just launched a carpool program in partnership with the state of Hawaii, and it's called High Ride Sharing. And the purpose of High Ride Sharing is basically to allow folks to carpool when they need to get to different destinations across the island. One unique function about High Ride Sharing that in addition to just for people who want to commute for work, it's also available for communities within our island to match carpoolers with other people who want to just do like a discretionary trip to get across the island when they're not able to utilize transit or if transit is not accessible. So it's another way of just moving people across our island when the transit system is not available to do so. High Bike is our bike share system that we operate in partnership with a nonprofit organization called PATH. We have stations in Hilo and in Kailua Kona. Starting in January, we integrated it more with the public transit system. So if you ride a heli-on bus, a flex route, our microtransit, our demand response service, you're able to ask the driver for a code. And with that code, you can put that in the High Bike app or in the Move It app or in the Transit app and be able to unlock High Bikes to ride as your first mile, last mile connection in the downtown Hilo and Kailua Kona areas. We are also working on expanding the High Bike system to add more stations. And as we construct our transit hubs across the island, we'll be adding High Bike stations to those transit hubs and to destinations surrounding that transit hub so people have an additional first mile, last mile connectivity. And to make all this work, we've entered into partnerships with Move It and Transit to act as our mobility as a service application. With that, you can plan bus trips, schedule Uber rides, unlock High Bikes. Since we're fare free, the paying for fares feature doesn't work, but however, we are a partner with Token Transit, and once we resume fares, again, should we elect to do that, people can pay for their fares utilizing the app. We will be integrating our microtransit app into Transit and Move It later on in this year. We are also launching GTFS RT so that people will be able to see our buses in real time in partnership with GMV, and they'll be able to see that through the Transit and Move It app. And then for our paratransit program, we have our EcoLane app, which is available for those that want to schedule and cancel paratransit trips on a separate app. I'd like to thank you for allowing me to present about our innovations in Hawaii County, and I'll be happy to answer questions after we have the presentation from IndyGo.
Well, great, John. That was really impressive. Most people kind of ease into this. You've just like jumped into the pool with all your clothes on. You did mention, I just want to just get clarity on thing, and then we'll move on to our next speaker. And that is, you mentioned at the end, you talked about your mobility as a service apps. that you're doing. But earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that you were going out for a procurement for a new app or an additional app. Can you clarify what that app that you're going out for procurement is? Because I know there are a lot of.
That's for the microtransit service that will be starting.
Okay. So for those of you on the call who are interested in that, John will be around, and you can tag him and find out about the RFP, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that was great. We'll come back to questions for John at the break. Our next speaker is tag team between Inez Evans, who's the president and CEO of IndyGo in Indianapolis, Indiana, and Aaron Vogel, the chief operating officer. So Inez, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I truly appreciate it, and thank you for having us today. Hi, everybody. So yes, Inez Evans, president and CEO of IndyGo, and
Aaron Vogel, Chief Operating Officer for IndyGo.
if you couldn't tell by our names who we were, just saying.
Background.
So today we're going to cover some basic things about mobility on demand, specifically surrounding our microtransit program that we have here at IndyGo, and Aaron will go into lessons learned throughout the presentation. So who is IndyGo? Think I'm driving the ship here. Yes. So IndyGo has approximately 32 routes, almost 3,000 bus stops, and over about 750 employees. You can see our statistics. Pre-COVID, we were about 9.2 annual passenger trips. And since COVID, we're at about 5.7 million. And we have a total of 301 buses. We also have some of the first BRT electric systems in the country, probably the largest BYD fleet in the country of 31 BYD buses. And so we're pretty proud, and we're starting on our Purple Line construction and soon to be hopefully our third and final one. So wanted just to kind of cover our square mileage comparison. So in Marion County, we are covering over 400 square miles. And, that's pretty large when you consider, Austin and Chicago and Cincinnati and LA. We cover a lot of square mileage in comparison to a lot of those systems. And so many of our pockets of our city have very poor infrastructure. There was a moratorium at one point in time when sidewalks weren't even allowed to be installed in our city. So why we started looking at microtransit was to understand that a 40-foot bus just wasn't the right solution for every place within our city, but we needed to find a solution because of the poor infrastructure and lack of sidewalks. So microtransit seeks to fill that gap. And what we looked at were the different types of partnerships between community-based partnerships and a transit-based partnership. And so here's our network that you can kind of see where our system is today. And then we'll go into where our microtransit zones are, and I'll go into a little bit more specifics into each one as I identify them. So our first one was our Midtown Get Around. This one started in 2020. It is our community-based microtransit, partnered with the Martin Luther King Community Center. We seeded them $100,000 in seed funding, and we leased them 4 accessible minivans. They cost $2 an hour, and they use the basic funds to take care of their wages and things of that nature. This came about because they presented a presentation during the Ford Motor City Challenge. They didn't win, unfortunately, but I was so intrigued by the thought process of starting a community-based microtransit that convinced our board to go ahead and take up the challenge. And they are still running, and customers love it. As you can see, they're relegated to a zone and take care of some of those very quick trips to the groceries and things of that nature. Our next one is Driven to Success. Driven to Success launched in 2021. We partnered with Pathways Resource Center. They were able to get a grant for additional operating funding through United Way of Central Indiana. The city of Indianapolis also is a partner, and our paratransit provider, RATP Dev, also partnered with some in-kind training and expertise on for their drivers to learn how to drive and training, etc. This area was selected as well because it is a totally unserved area with very poor infrastructure. We're providing seed funding again at $70,000 each year for the next 2 years. We donated 5 vehicles to them. And so the first one, we leased the vehicles for $1 each. This time we donated the buses. And then the cost for that is $2. Now we're going to what mostly everybody does, is a Indy Connect service, where it is driven through and operated through via transit, and it is directly by IndyGo. And so our team has the direct interaction. It services a number of popular destinations, one of which was our Justice Center. So our Justice Center was located downtown. They moved into an area that was not well served by our bus routes. And so this was a very quick solution and our ability to see how we could service them better. So now I'm going to turn it over to Aaron, who's going to take you into the meat of what did we learn through the different processes.
Well, thanks, Inez. As you have heard, we definitely have embarked on a journey of microtransit over the last couple of years with our 3 different programs. As we look back with our different programs, we have identified and realized that not all of these programs are created equal. And essentially, we kind of classified and defined them separately. We have the community-based microtransit programs, which partner with nonprofits and different community businesses without our county and city. Whereas transit-based microtransit, we're really trying to drive forward the first and last mile solution, try to get people to our bus rapid transit lines, interconnect within the zones with the ultimate goal of possibly eliminating unproductive routes or merging different routes together to have maybe 2 lines be served as one. And that's really our driving factor with the Indy Connect for the transit-based microtransit. For community-based, what we're really trying to do is bridge those gaps within the communities that Inez mentioned that have no service, that are food deserts, where a 40-foot bus typically would not fit for geographical reasons. The street might not be big enough, or the ridership does not actually warrant having a 40-foot bus. Through this experience, we've realized that each partner that we've had through our microtransit experience has been very different. Partners like VIA that are involved with Indy Connect are very familiar with transit. We basically need to tell them what we want, when we want, and they tell us how much it is, essentially. Whereas some of the other entities never done transportation before, and we had to educate them. Not only did we provide seed money for them, we also were pseudo consultants, essentially, and gave them guidance on what transportation is. And some of them never even own vehicles. So as simple things as this is how you register your vehicles. We had a lot of conversations about how to manage fares. Everyone collects a fare, right? We want to get paid for what we do. But how do you collect that, right? IndyGo Connect was through an app-based system or a voucher for those unbanked people that could go to our transit center. And the other community-based microtransits was done through a voucher system because they didn't realize that there's some risk involved with collecting fare at the driver level. And so we were able to educate them through that process to make it successful for them. In addition to that, it was managed a process to understand how to take the reservation, how to distribute it to the driver, and then also come back and collect the data. Everyone had these great ideas to connect and improve the mobility ecosystem, but working through those logistics took a little bit more hand-holding with some of our partners. Additionally, for us, as Inez mentioned, our structure for assets, particularly vehicles, were different for each one of our partnerships. We leased one, we donated, and then we asked for a turnkey. Turnkey is great, not a lot of involvement, not a lot of upfront capital costs, but you're going to pay a lot for it, and there's going to be a markup on it. So it's something to consider. The donation, we donated our retired paratransit vehicles. We did a midlife overhaul, handed those over, and we're able to take our name off the registration and title, which was very beneficial from a risk reduction. For the leased one, we realized we actually kind of liked that because we used 5310 fundings and leased it to them for the dollar that Inez mentioned, but it allows us to have a little bit of leverage if they are not complying with their expectations. And that is something we're working through and kind of leveraging right now in terms of making sure they're not competing with public transit. So it's food for thought as you develop your programs here in the future. One area that we continue to also develop through our lessons learned is what exactly defines success for these programs. And so far with these 3 launches, we've got about 5 different key components for success. One is, are we getting and capturing new riders, someone that would not typically take transit or transportation and drive their own car? We want to attract those individuals. 2, are we getting repeat customers? We want to make sure it's not a one and done scenario where people just try the new greatest thing out there, but they come back because they like our services and it's a good experience. 3rd, we want to make sure that we're expanding the mobility ecosystem and essentially going to places we never could go before. 4th one is sustainability. We want to ensure that all these programs can sustain themselves from 1 to 2 to 3 years out. As you've seen, Martin Luther King has been in operation for 2 years. We're very proud of that and look forward to future success with our other programs. The last one is still a work in progress for us, but that essentially is cost effectiveness, right? We want to be good stewards of taxpayers' dollars, and we're looking at making sure that our trips make sense and that we're not spending too much per trip. In addition to that, we're also trying to start to look at what can we do with our paratransit passengers that might live in these zones where possibly we could shift them from paratransit over to the microtransit programs, because paratransit trips, as you are aware, nationwide are just extremely expensive. And so I think that's a real opportunity for us from a cost saving perspective, as paratransit folks a lot of time are just going down the street to the local dialysis, doctor's appointment, or grocery store. And this is real potential. We're really excited to see where this can go in the future. Next, if you're going to do seed money and startups, so like we did for 2 of our 3 programs, that's good. It's nice. It's one and done. You can kind of wash your hands, but it's very important to be very clear of your expectations that this is a sustainable program past that seed money, and that what other expectations there are of the agency. Ongoing funding, that is basically through a reimbursement process, like you have like a VIA through the IndyConnect program. We have like essentially having a contractor providing services, but in doing so, you need to be mindful that there's contract oversight because they're constantly spending money, and you want to be responsible in making sure that the money's going in the right places and you're utilizing your resources the best. So there is some time commitment involved. In fact, for our IndyConnect program, internally, we spend at least an hour a week with 5 or 6 of us and strategize and work on this program to make sure that it's going to be a viable solution for us down the road. Another thing that we've learned throughout our time here with microtransit is the data collection, right? We wanted data. Our first pilot was like, okay, cool, we'll give you data, we'll give you the ridership. Well, we need a little bit more than that. We're a transit agency and we'd like to report it to National Transit Database. So we need to know essentially the how, the what, the when, and the where, right? How are you going to report? Is it once a month? Is it every day? Is it annually? And then how are you going to produce it? Is it just ridership? Not for us. We want to know the mileage, the revenue hours, and also the start and end location, so we can drill down a level deeper in ensuring our commitment to enhancing mobility ecosystem is taking place, and we're not essentially competing with ourselves from a public sector and transit sector standpoint. The last thing worthy of note is some marketing do's and don'ts. When partnering with some of the smaller agencies or nonprofit agencies, we realize that they don't have marketing resources. So it's really important to go into it knowing that you want to kind of drive that conversation, help them along. It only helps out in the long run to make sure that the look and feel is on brand with you. And I think that it's very successful in the outcome. And it also can be used for consideration for in-kind match for other funding opportunities later. One of the don'ts that we learned is making sure that in your contract that you don't allow your partners to release media information
looking at it,
or press releases without looking at it or having your approval in advance first. So that is kind of our high level lessons learned across our 3 projects over the last 2.5 years. Hopefully that was a value to the attendees today. I'm going to transition it back to Inez on our next big idea.
And make sure on your marketing material that your name is on it, because if you've seeded money or donated vehicles or something, that you get credit for it. So wrapping it up, our next big things, as Aaron mentioned, you know, one of our big premises is to look at decreasing our paratransit costs. Our rides are over $40 per trip right now, you know, and we think microtransit has a way to increase independence. You know, paratransit requires 24-hour minimum in advance notifications. If you want same-day trips, you're not prohibited from doing it, but you can attach a financial penalty by making the ride, you know, $8, $10, $20, whatever you want to do. So by having accessible vehicles, we believe we can truly get into more of a same-day opportunity for those trips. So Miss Mary can go get that gallon of milk that she just woke up in the morning and she wants to make that lemon cake, and she can go do that. So increasing microtransit is going to be key for us, as Aaron said, also as we're, you know, incorporating our COA that we're in the process of doing now. We're identifying areas where ridership is pretty low. That 40-foot bus is not the best option for us, and a smaller bus can take hold. But with the technology that's out there today, everybody wants to do it through an app. Well, in our population, where 70% of our riders make less than $35,000, a smartphone may not be the best option for them. So our last thing is to work on our mobility concierge program, where individuals who don't have a smartphone can call into our call center and have our folks book the ride for them. So that is it in a nutshell, and I'll turn it over for questions or to our next speaker. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Inez and Aaron. That was awesome. You guys are doing some really, really interesting and creative things. I can't wait to dive into the whole paratransit conversation a little bit later. I did have one quick question. So of the three programs you talked about, two were with innovative startups. And I'm curious, do you have a lab program, or how are you generating or supporting that kind of infrastructure for startups in your community?
So with the first one, it was through the Ford Mobility program. I was able to meet the Martin Luther King Center. So they were our first guinea pigs, to be honest. We learned a lot from them. We, you know, it was trial and error. How much did we need to help them with? Technology, call center. We had to create an entire manual. So we've created a book that we can replicate and do fill in the blanks for the next one as they come along. And we have to make very minor modifications to it. Does that kind of help answer the question?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you've thought about as a new non-fair revenue source to sell that book to other transit agencies.
I'm down for it. You done yet? Boom!
Contact us after.
There you go. All right. Okay. Well, we'll follow up on that as well. Anyways, so thank you. That was great. And our last speaker this morning is Audrey Denis from Cubic. Audrey, I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, everybody. I'm Audrey Denis from Cubic. So thanks, everybody, so much for joining us for this conversation and to the great presentations so far. It's been really interesting to hear about what you guys have been implementing and kind of those lessons learned in the field. So I'm going to take a step back and talk about the roadmap of mobility on demand and the evolution to MOD. So the story of mobility on demand started in 2015 and has been accelerated by significant investment by venture capital funded startups in this space. The explosion of micromobility and private mobility service providers have fueled a lot of this excitement. And since that time, several MOD operators have come and gone. So a couple of examples: Mobility X in Singapore and Kaiti in Finland, which begs the question, is MOD still viable? And the answer is yes. The recent successes that we've seen demonstrated today, the expansion of the Odin MAS trial in Brisbane, are great early successes. But I think what we're seeing is that the original vision, which was driven by private commercial entities, there was an app that was downloaded and a bundled subscription model, is changing. So different stakeholders are now driving the MOD discussion, and collaboration is being led by public agencies. And we're now climbing that slope of acceptance. So the number of trials that have occurred globally and the attempted commercial deployments have given us some idea of what MOD can look like and what can make it work. So the realization of all the outputs to date is that the approach to MOD is changing. What was previously commercially led, app-driven, business-to-consumer engagement has had limited success, or in some cases has even failed. So the realization is that MOD is not a product, it's an ecosystem. It's an environment where all of the stakeholders can combine their offerings and the consumer can be informed and can book and pay for mobility services. So in this ecosystem, there is a place for commercial MOD operators to still operate, and they can work in the ecosystem to bundle offerings and manage pay-as-you-go services. There's private mobility service providers like bikes and scooter shares or demand responsive transport services that can access the market and deliver their services. And for public transport operators, they get access to mobility services that can augment the public transport network, support first mile, last mile gap filling, and help users to plan multimodal journeys that include transit as that trunk network. But perhaps most importantly, the end user has mobility delivered simply and efficiently in a way that breeds adoption and utilization. But to work together, we need to share data, share intent, and share services in a way that is amenable to all stakeholders. So interoperability is really going to be the crux of success. But let's be clear, MOD ecosystem will be different in every city and region. MOD will need to deliver whatever the policy objectives are for a region, city, town, university, state, country. And whatever the policy goals are and the situation requires partnerships, trust, and importantly, collaboration. If we collaborate, everyone wins, and a rising tide lifts all ships. So as you can see, we've evolved from the initial vision of MOD, what we call version 1.0, to an ecosystem approach to MOD where collaboration is key. And this is what we term as the evolution of MOD, or MOD 2.0. So as we've seen, MOD is an evolution, and there will be a roadmap to get to the situation where mobility policies of a city can be achieved. MOD doesn't happen overnight. MOD needs to evolve. And all the component pieces of MOD, which we have listed on the left, need to evolve in unison. And some of those will happen at different rates. So some steps in this evolution are dependent on specific steps being completed in other functions first. So for example, we can't have multimodal journey planning without established offering that includes multiple modes. But the end goal of evolution gets a city or a region to a place where it can offer intermodal solutions to its customers using a combination of public and private mobility services. Importantly, like every journey, there's not going to be one path to get there. Every city's journey to MOD will be different and is going to be defined by a different roadmap to achieve the goals for that city, region, or town. So now we'll take a look at some of the different services and how they evolve with the components of this roadmap. So the mobility services are the different modes of public and private mobility that a city or region wants to bring on board. So if you have just a bus service in a town, you're definitely a single mode. But if you're an agency with bus, train, multiple modes, maybe even including ferry, the question then becomes, what other mode services do you want to think about on the private side to potentially integrate, and in what order? So many cities globally now are looking at adding micromobility, like we've been talking about already, bikes, scooters, as an effective way of connecting parts of the user network for a first mile, last mile service. And other cities are looking a lot at demand responsive transport services to augment and add to the mobility network. Specifically in the US, I think we're looking at adding parking into the mobility ecosystem in recognition that getting someone to a park and ride is an effective way of getting them to drive, is more effective perhaps than getting them to drive all the way to their destination and creating congestion in downtown urban centers. But we don't want to focus only on getting people out of cars, but rather delivering the most efficient mobility to users and the network. So integrating cars and parking into this broader dialogue. And the important takeaway is that the agency or city needs to define what it wants to add and when. There's no rule that says we have to add scooter before DRT, and it's all going to be dependent on the mobility offerings that a city or town has in the network and how it sees those ability to augment the existing transport network. So the key element here is thinking about where private mobility can fill the gaps in the mobility ecosystem. Cities and agencies don't need to own every mobility service, but rather bring those mobility services into the ecosystem so that all users can access them as needed. So we need to address the issues of interoperability and sharing. In order for Mobility on Demand 2.0 to work, we need to collaborate. I think first we can address data. There's a preconception that data has a value, and as such, private organizations, agencies are often reluctant to share. While it can be argued that there is an intrinsic value of data, the real value comes from providing data to drive insights and deliver information necessary to support mobility services. So the first thing we need to do is think about how we agree to standards and agree to the principles of data sharing. And next, we can address the customer interface. If you have one mobility service, you have a single mode to plan, and in that instance, the timetable and the existing map might be the best option. But as you add in more modes and you add in more options, you require more shared data to provide those options and choices to the end user. The data has to be correct, the data has to be up to date and usable so that the services presented exist and plans made are realistic and executable. So the end user, the traveler, needs to trust the information provided is correct and the services booked can be executed. So for example, we need to be very clear about when in real time a bus might be arriving, as well as the exact location of the bus stop, so that a user can be communicated when they need to pick up their scooter and where to drop that scooter off, so that they make sure that they're on the right side of the street to get onto the bus without missing the bus and watching the taillights go by. So lastly, we can look at payments, and that's something that we specialize in. So as the complexity of the MOD ecosystem increases and the number of modes increases, the user will expect that an end-to-end journey can be planned, booked, and paid through a single interface. And note that we're using the word interface, not app. MOD should be open to all and accessible via a number of means, and equity is needed for everyone. So we want to make sure that those who don't have smartphones, those that are unbanked, are still equally able to access the network. In order to offer integrated payments, first we need to think about the role of account-based ticketing. This is a building block for the evolution of MOD when we start to look at the integration of private mobility services. The need to share and link account data for bookings and payments becomes essential. Now I think we can take a look from the city or the agency perspective. So assuming we've integrated different public and private mobility options, and we've overcome data standardization and sharing, and we have all the technical prerequisites covered, so a big task, we then need to examine making MOD work for the traveler and for the city and agency. So in order to achieve public policy objectives, the traveler can be incentivized to make mobility choices that can benefit them as well as the city. For example, if you know that there's a massive concert or event going on downtown, you can identify travelers that regularly travel through that area. You can push notifications to them to make them aware, or even incentivize them to change their journey if possible, to free up capacity on the network for event attendees. And maybe you make their journey free, but incentivization can and does work. And as modes increase, we can add nudges across modes. So maybe we want people to take the rail network instead of a given bus route due to heavy congestion from road work that's going on the bus route. And that's achievable via nudging and incentivization. At the extreme ends of the scale, say, for example, road user charging and tolling is integrated into the mobility ecosystem, you can incentivize someone to drive into the city on a hot day, or not to drive into the city on a hot day, excuse me, and use public transport instead in order to mitigate environmental issues. So these nudges and incentives can help achieve policy goals, and as MOD evolves within a city or region, the mobility policy can change and expand to address the ability of a city to fully manage the mobility network in the delivery of mobility on demand. Oops, sorry. So I think lastly, we need to address the customer service levels and what the end user can expect. So if I have one mode of transport, I have one number to call when things go wrong, or when I have to load money into my account, or when I need information or help with services or offers. But if you add more public transport mobility options, this may be the same touch point, and the needs and pertinent details, data, and a common account become more critical. But when you start to integrate public and private mobility options, you need to consider what happens when you need to provide customer service. Who do you call if one leg of your journey has an issue, or if it impacts the entire journey? Say, for example, you have difficulty unlocking the scooter and you miss the bus. So the necessity to have a simple methodology for integrating customer services and providing the necessary abilities to support becomes critical. This hasn't really come to fruition yet, but many are planning on how we do this and integrating that full customer service to make sure that users are able to leverage MOD to achieve a full journey. So in sum, MOD is not an app or a product. It's an ecosystem that all stakeholders have to collaborate on in order to achieve truly integrated mobility. The vision of MOD for one city will differ from the next city, university, town, region, based on the objectives that a city is trying to achieve, as well as the mobility options that are available in that network. There's no standard blueprint for MOD, and we all have to work together and cooperate to evolve together to a combined vision for mobility. And then finally, critical to the success is collaboration. We all need to think about how we support and buy into the MOD ecosystem, and a common vision, goals, and roadmap will need to be established. Thank you.
Let's see. Thank you, Audrey. That was great. You're very optimistic and very positive. I have lots of questions about how we accomplish some of the things that you've talked about and some definitions. But the one question I want to start with, well, before I get started, or before I ask the first question, so for those of you in the audience, there is a Q&A box. I see we've got about 10 or so questions there. So go ahead and populate them, and I'll kind of pick and choose, and we'll try to get as many of them done as possible. But Audrey, my question, it's not very often that I hear a private company talking about sharing data and open data. I hear agencies talk about it because it's their data. I hear public interest groups talk about it because of the ultimate benefits of it. But generally, private companies want to either monetize the data or keep the data so that they can maintain their proprietary systems and not allow the kind of integration that you're talking about. So what are you seeing something different out there than I'm seeing? I mean, can you talk a little bit about how we get from a very laudable, from where we are today to the very laudable goal that you've laid out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely think that there is a tendency to be averse to data sharing. And I think that as we evolve towards this ecosystem approach, that appropriately sharing data is going to be absolutely critical for us to be able to deliver the kind of seamless mobility that we're talking about, that helps users to understand how they tie together a trip, how they plan, book, and pay for that trip. And I think that it becomes sort of the question of, you need the very clear information about the exact location of the transit network, but also of private mobility. We need to establish that shared account base so that we can integrate payment. So I think that establishing data standards is really important. And then thinking about how do we anonymize that data? How do we make it really safe for us to be able to share that data is sort of another really important piece of that conversation.
Okay, let me, one other just kind of quick question for you.
Yeah.
in the mobility as a service application, I guess I was trying to understand whether the application, the ecosystem, the application that you talked about, also seems to be a goal that it seems to be a unicorn. I've seen every agency I work with has got multiple apps, and those that are integrating their mobility on demand partners into the apps, there's no seamless integration. You go from the app into the other apps to pay, or from the app into the other apps to do your reservation. I mean, and there's some marginal movement forward, but the idea that we all had 5 or 10 years ago that there would be a single app where you could seamlessly move between IndyGo through their service options, through Uber's Uber options, through the bike share options, through car share options, and have one account and do the end-to-end kind of solution with one payment. I've never seen it. Have you? I mean, and if so, can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's that seems like one of those things we all want and we all need, but we've not been able to do it because of the different political issues.
Right, absolutely. I think that it's an evolution, right? I don't think that we're at a destination yet. And I think that the sort of important change in the thought process is that we're going from a single app that's going to integrate everything to thinking about an ecosystem approach with the appropriate sharing that allows us to approach that common interface from a number of different angles. So for example, if we're sharing open APIs, we're making data available, a user might be able to plan, book, and pay for an integrated journey, not just from one single app, but from a multitude of different interfaces, whether that's through the agency or a private provider. I think to your point, Scott, we're not there yet. That we're still working on deep links. We're thinking about how do we establish the tokenization of the account that allows us to really do that sharing and think about how we do the integrated payment. So I think it's an evolution that we're working towards, and making the user kind of the end goal there, I think is really critical. So thinking about how is it that we're delivering a seamless experience to the user, as opposed to trying to get everybody to go through kind of the individual interfaces that exist within our networks. Okay. I think to that point, though, there are some good examples of the integration of different modes into a common interface. So I think the Odin app, for example, in Brisbane is a good example of pulling in private transportation as well as public, bundling that and making it available. Right now it's mostly with University of Queensland students, but unlimited public transport, unlimited scooters, and then sort of access to rideshare and other modes all through kind of a single interface. But to your point, it's deep link. So it's not sort of that one integrated piece yet.
John, Aaron, Inez, any comments on either of those two questions? Anybody want to weigh in, or should we move on? Okay. The next question is from one of the speakers, and I think it's a really, really important one, having wrestled these issues a lot. Really interested, particularly from John and Inez, is as you start to roll out these microservices, some of which you partner with private companies, some of which you take on yourself. What has your experience been, or what has your experience been working with the unions and managing those issues? Inez, why don't you start?
So we've been very transparent with our union about what our end goal is. One, we are trying to fill gaps. They both agree that a 40-foot bus is not the ultimate option in every area. Where we differ right now, of course, is whose work is it? We believe that this is new work and have contended to move in that premise that this is not work that they are currently doing. And so no grievances have been filed and we have not had any labor challenges. I think where we'll be faced with a different opportunity is when the new COA is put into place and other microtransits are looked upon, and we look to potentially decrease from a 40-foot bus into microtransit. I think that's where we're going to get into a deeper conversation with them.
Yeah, and one about job rates and job categories as well, I suspect.
Exactly. I mean, we tried in our last negotiations in a preemptive strategy to begin to have a different, we were trying to negotiate in a separate rate for smaller vehicles because we knew we were going to be exploring microtransits in a cutaway setting. The current union leadership is not open to that strategy, even though that we've shown them that we need to cut our costs overall as an agency by about 30% in order to meet the referendum where we are trying to service everybody as much as we possibly can. And, you know, the smaller bus is less than $100 an hour and the 40-foot bus is $150 an hour. So we're trying to do more with the same dollars.
Yeah, and just to add to, the big thing is, as we approach this going forward, and as we have in the past, as we contracted out a circulator route, our big focus is not impacting any union jobs.
Sure.
And we will continue to keep that motto, is that is not the intent here, is to harm any individual positions. And with the rate we are with the economy right now, we have plenty of open positions. So we are hopeful that it's a fairly smooth transition in the future.
Even though we're all trying to go to Hawaii now after John's presentation.
Yeah, it sounds like Nirvana, right?
Obviously.
Just one last issue, and then I want John to weigh in on this, and that is, I don't know if IndyGo has started started to deploy autonomous shuttles, and whether you've had to deal with that union issue as well. I know that's one I've worked with on a couple of times, and that's not a fun one either.
So we did have a partnership with an organization who came in and piloted an autonomous vehicle, because we do think there is an opportunity here to bring autonomous technology into our city, especially as a connecting point to points within our downtown core, connecting to our bus rapid transit lines. And it was very successful. And so, you know, we're trying to see where we go from here with it, but the union was made very aware of this. The vehicles were even on our property. Our names were associated with the whole pilot program. So it's in our future. And our bus rapid transit lines, in total transparency, would probably be the first lines that we would be looking to do autonomous technology on. And we've told them this.
John, any comments from you regarding your relationship with the unions as you kind of roll out these new technologies?
Well, we have a unique situation. Unions are generally governed by Hawaii state law, and our bus operators are actually non-union, but my administrative staff and mechanics are union because the bus operators work for a contractor, but the administrative staff and the mechanics work directly for the agency. So there hasn't been any challenges per se with, as we implement any service in the Helion system, we're allowed to contract it out. The issue is that I can't necessarily have a contractor maintain it unless they're utilizing their own vehicles. And we have a hybrid system where we provide buses where our mechanics will maintain those buses regardless of the service mode, fixed route, microtransit, paratransit. And then we also have the contractor also provide their own buses with their own mechanics. So the unions are aware as we add vehicles to the transit system that they're responsible for maintaining it regardless of the size. But the unions don't necessarily, I guess, for lack of a better word, care how the service is being operated, because our drivers are non-unionized and they're contracted. One thing about Hawaii state law, anytime we contract out our operation, we have to charge the same wage as if they were government employees. So in their contracts, the drivers are making the same wage that a unionized bus operator would make if they were a county employee, as in the case in Kauai County, where their entire operation is in-house.
Interesting. So John, let me ask you a separate question, and then I'll let the other panelists weigh in on it, because it's one that I've kind of been struggling with. And so at this point, you're not charging fares. Did I get that right?
Yeah, the entire transit system is zero fare.
Okay, but you still have to meet a budget, and you still have to keep your costs down as much as possible. So, and this may be more applicable to Inez and Aaron, but why don't I start with you? And that is, so one of the questions that often comes up in this space is, and I'm going to ask it two different ways. One is, how do you prevent your private partners from skimming off the cream and driving your cost of operating up? And then the flip side of that, or where that really plays out very directly, is in paratransit, at least in my experience. As you move the easy paratransit fares where you don't need special services, everybody wants to do those, and I'm sure that you want to do those as well. It's the harder paratransit that are really the expensive ones, and as you skim off the top of those, the cost of paratransit service starts to skyrocket and really becomes untenable. At least that's am I? Does that resonate with either you, John, or you, Aaron, and Inez?
Yeah, so we're kind of in a unique situation, and I'll kind of lay the landscape really quickly and then answer your question. We have general excise tax that's funding our entire transit operation plus federal funds. This was a tax that was passed in 2019, basically to rebuild our transit system, and it goes into play until 2030 unless the state legislature extends it. So that's basically a half a cent that's funding us, and we don't use county general fund or highway fund to pay for our operation. Because our ridership has declined significantly over the past decade, from 1.2 million passenger trips to about 300,000 passenger trips last fiscal year, because of just the state of the transit system, we're having to basically rebuild and reintroduce people to our system, which is the caveat on why we went fare free. So when it comes to the reduction of costs, our paratransit ridership is actually very low. And the reason why it's very low is because we've diversified our operations with so many different other mobility options for people to utilize. The door-to-door service, the subsidized taxi, the fixed route system, the flex route system, to where people find utilizing the paratransit system that are ADA eligible a bit burdensome because of the process you have to go through. Next day advance reservations, specific requirements on no-shows. So they want to utilize our other subsidy programs. So those subsidy programs that we've implemented, or other mobility programs, has really driven down our paratransit costs as a whole. Now, of course, this can change as our population starts to age and the services start to get to, for lack of a better word, capacity, because we're starting to see our ridership increase across the board with all of these programs. So we're definitely monitoring, and we're definitely going to continue to engage our community to utilize our other programs so that we don't have that higher subsidy cost. On the private sector, what we're doing, this has been a problem in the past where we've paid a lot to the private sectors to operate our service. And that's just because as we procured our services, we weren't necessarily analyzing the costs. We were just accepting the bids as they come. So we're now diving deeper into the proposals that are being issued and that are being submitted. I'm trying to understand the price. And then we're also doing our best to encourage more competition to bid on the services that we're providing, so it can overall drive down that operating cost per hour. And we saw that success the last time we did our fixed route contract back in 2020. And we're actually undergoing paratransit as we speak, so we'll see how those costs come in.
Inez, Aaron, thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I think we've taken a multi-strand approach like John has as well for our operation. So for the last, I don't know, 30-something years, paratransit, although paid for by IndyGo, the contractor always had their own separate facility. And every time the contract changed over, we had to give them startup costs and redo their facilities and all that. So this last go around in the last 2 years, we have bought and procured our own paratransit facility to help control those costs. We own the furniture. We've made it into a turnkey operation. So that was one of our strategies to stop some of those costs rising and tucking some of those costs in. Another thing that and like John talked about, we too have drilled down into the contracts really deeply. Both Aaron and I have worked on the private side for every one of the alphabet soup name companies that are out there. We both work for them. So we kind of know how to read their price proposals and to understand where the money is. And so we challenge them and we push back on them very heavily on some of those costs. We have put in a lot more QA controls. So there's a lot more reports, and I hate to say it, there's a lot more liquidated damages that are placed on them as well when it comes to productivity, on-time performance, ride times, things of that nature. But I think IndyGo as a whole, though, is taking a dramatic step. And so right now we serve all of Marion County with paratransit. And as we showed in our slide, it's over 400 square miles. Well, we don't have fixed route bus service in all 400 square miles. And so unfortunately, we're having to make some hard decisions. The long distance trips are the ones that are killing us and our contractor, to be honest, and creating us to be very unproductive. So in the first of this year, we'll have 2 programs, a non-ADA program that's more premier, and then our ADA program. And we will judge our pricing and productivity, on-time performance based on our ADA program and not all collectively. We're also putting in what we're working on, a volunteer driver program to where the customer can select a family member or friend and we would pay them to provide their trip to work. We're just going to start with work trips first. Just like everybody else on the call, we're having challenges finding operators. And so we're trying to think outside the box in any way we can to kind of keep those costs down, and it can maintain our promise. Anything else, Aaron, you want to add?
That was beautiful. I don't have much more to add to it.
All right. Well, we have a minute left. You guys have rocked. You guys have been great. I've got a list of 100 questions. For each of you speakers, there's a Q&A session in the section with a number of questions. So please go in and write the answers to the questions. I think that's really important. Kind of one last speed question, and maybe it's I'll start with you, Inez, because you were kind of referencing it, and that is about selecting partners. I mean, selecting partners is part voodoo, part process, and part luck. So I'm kind of, if everybody can kind of give 30 seconds on what if you can give the people on the call just one thing that they should do, at whether they should focus on the voodoo part or on the process part or on the good luck part. But if you can give them one highlight about how do you pick a good partner, that would be great.
I'm gonna let Aaron take that one.
You said just one, right?
Just one.
So they serve a good community purpose and they're adding mobility to the community.
Okay. Audrey.
I think it's focusing on delivering mobility to the end user. So really thinking about what are the needs and the gaps that we're filling and how do we make sure that we deliver that equitably to users. So making sure that we're not just excited for technology's sake, but really how does it deliver value to the end user, and making sure that we have those necessary options for those users who are unbanked or don't have access to smartphones, but making sure that mobility is accessible for everybody and we're delivering a better journey.
Great. And John?
Basically mobility for all, and just being able to provide the best possible service that's very efficient and effective for our community as a whole.
Super. Well, thank you again. You guys have been great. It was a great panel. Anytime I get a chance to speak with you or work with you again, I will do it. And back to you, Namrata.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Scott, for moderating this session. And thank you, John, Inez, Aaron, and Audrey for those exciting presentations. What a fantastic first session. Thank you so much.